For 6 years, the most beautiful car in the world sat useless in a glass garage on a hill overlooking the city, and not one of the 23 mechanics who touched it could make it run. The Ferrari belonged to a man named Richard Hale, a billionaire who had built his fortune from nothing and lost the one thing money couldn't buy back, his son. The car had been a gift, bought the week before the accident that took the boy's life, and Richard had never driven it. Instead, he had spent a fortune trying to get it to start, not because he needed a car, but because some part of him believed that if the engine ever turned over, it would mean the universe still owed him something. Every expert who came left shaking their head. The car was flawless. The wiring was perfect. And yet it would not run. If you believe in second chances, in kindness that outlasts logic, and in the idea that broken things can still be fixed by the right hands, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Daniel Reyes did not know any of this history when he pulled his rusted pickup truck through the gates of the Hale estate on a Tuesday morning in March. He was 34 years old, a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter Mia after her mother left them both 2 years earlier, and he was 3 months behind on rent. He had taken the job posting from the classifieds not because he was an expert in luxury automobiles, but because the pay for a single day's diagnostic work was more than he made in a month at the auto shop on 5th Street. He told himself it was just another car. He did not yet know it would change his life. Daniel had learned about engines the way most people learn about grief, through necessity. His father had been a mechanic in a small town in Texas, and Daniel had spent his childhood underneath cars instead of on baseball fields, handing his father wrenches and learning the language of pistons and belts before he learned to read. When his father died, Daniel was 17, and the workshop closed within the year, but the knowledge stayed lodged in his hands like muscle memory that never faded. He had never worked on anything close to a Ferrari. He had never needed to. But he needed the money now more than he had ever needed anything, because Mia's school had called that week about an overdue tuition balance, and the food in their apartment was running low enough that Daniel had started skipping dinner so his daughter wouldn't notice hers was smaller. When he arrived, a groundskeeper led him past the main house to the garage, where the Ferrari sat beneath a soft white light like something in a museum. Richard Hale was there, older than Daniel expected, with the kind of tired eyes that come from years of sleeping badly. He did not shake Daniel's hand. He simply said that the car did not start, that everyone before him had failed, and that Daniel had exactly 1 day before he would be asked to leave like the others. There was no warmth in his voice, only the flat exhaustion of a man who had stopped expecting anything to work out. Daniel did not ask about the car's history that first day. He simply opened the hood and began to look, the way his father had taught him, not at what the manual said should be there, but at what was actually there. He checked the fuel lines, the battery, the starter, all the obvious places the previous experts had surely checked 100 times. Hours passed. The sun moved across the garage windows. Richard watched from a chair in the corner, arms crossed, saying nothing, clearly waiting for Daniel to give up like everyone before him. It was near evening when Daniel noticed something strange, not in the engine itself, but in a small compartment behind the glove box that seemed to have been sealed shut, not by a mechanical fault, but on purpose, as though someone had wanted it closed for good. When he finally pried it open, he found an envelope, yellowed slightly with time, tucked into the space where wiring should have been. Inside was a letter written in a child's handwriting, addressed to Dad, describing how excited the boy was to finally learn to drive when he turned 16, how he had picked out this exact car from a magazine, how he couldn't wait for the day they would take it out together. Daniel sat there in the quiet garage holding a dead boy's last letter to his father, and for a moment he forgot entirely about the job he had been hired to do. He did not know yet that Richard's son had died in a car accident 3 days after this letter was written, that the letter had never been delivered because the boy had planned to leave it on the passenger seat as a surprise, that Richard had discovered it months later while grieving and, unable to bear reading it fully, had sealed it inside the car itself rather than throw it away or keep it somewhere he'd have to face it. He had told no mechanic about it. He had let them all search blindly for a mechanical failure that was never really the problem, because the truth was that Richard himself, without ever consciously realizing it, had sabotaged the ignition wiring behind that very compartment the week after the funeral, in a moment of grief he could barely remember, unable to let the car that killed his boy's future ever come alive again. When Daniel walked out of the garage holding the envelope, he found Richard still sitting in his chair, and something in Daniel's face must have told him what had been found, because the older man's composure broke for the first time in 6 years. Daniel did not simply hand him the letter. He sat down across from him, a stranger in oil-stained clothes beside a billionaire in a tailored suit, and he asked Richard, gently, if he wanted him to read it aloud, because some words are too heavy to carry alone. Richard nodded, unable to speak, and Daniel read the letter slowly, his own voice catching more than once, because he thought of Mia, of his own fear of losing more time with her than he already had working double shifts, and he understood in that moment that grief does not care how much money a person has. Richard wept in that garage the way he had not allowed himself to weep at the funeral, when he'd had to be strong for cameras and business partners and a wife who left him not long after. Daniel did not try to fix the moment with words. He simply stayed, the way his own father used to stay quietly beside him when Daniel was small and scared, not offering solutions, only presence. It was, in its own way, the first real repair Daniel made that day, though it had nothing to do with an engine. It took Daniel 2 more hours to rewire the ignition system properly, tracing the damage back to a single severed connection hidden exactly where the compartment had been sealed. When the engine finally roared to life, the sound echoing through the garage for the first time in 6 years, Richard did not celebrate. He simply closed his eyes and let the vibration move through him like something sacred, like his son's voice finally reaching him across the years. He asked Daniel, quietly, if he would take a drive with him, and the 2 men, strangers hours before, pulled out of the estate in a car that had waited 6 years to remember how to run. Richard did not let Daniel leave that night without knowing his story. He asked about the daughter Daniel mentioned once in passing, about the late rent, about the father who had taught him everything he knew about engines and nothing about how to ask for help. And when Daniel finally admitted, reluctantly, how close he and Mia were to losing their apartment, Richard did something no contract or fortune could have prepared Daniel for. He did not simply pay him for the day's work. He offered him a permanent position managing his entire collection of vehicles, at a salary that would change Daniel's life, and beyond that, he offered to cover Mia's tuition himself, not as charity, he said, but as a debt repaid, because Daniel had fixed something in that garage that no expert with all the money in the world had been able to touch. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that the people who show up quietly, without fanfare, are sometimes the ones who save us, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below, because it truly means the world and helps this story reach someone else who might need it today. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something simple. If you have ever lost someone you loved, or if you know what it feels like to hold on to hope when everyone else has given up, type the word "believe" in the comments below, just so we can see how many hearts this story has touched tonight. Months later, Daniel would stand in the doorway of a new apartment, one with a real kitchen table and a room just for Mia, and he would think back on that Tuesday not as the day he fixed a Ferrari, but as the day he learned that some engines do not fail because of broken wires alone, but because of broken hearts that need someone patient enough to sit beside them in the dark before the light can come back on. And somewhere on that hill overlooking the city, a father who had once believed nothing could be repaired now drove his son's car every single Sunday, windows down, letter tucked safely in the glove box where it belonged, no longer sealed away, but carried, the way love is meant to be carried, out in the open, moving forward.